What is interesting to see in the course of Dutch history is that several times, when the freedom of the Dutch people was felt to be at stake or under threat, the name of an ancient Germanic tribe was called to attention, the Batavians, and their infamous revolt against the Roman Empire. What we'll be arguing today is that the visual representation of these Batavians in 17th century Dutch painting actually reflected more on 17th century Dutch values and on the Batavians themselves. But what are we talking about exactly? Who are these Batavians? Well, the Batavians were a Germanic tribe that was settled in the river delta of the modern-day Netherlands. And in antiquity it had an allied status and supplied allied troops to the Roman army. And the historian Tacitus tells us in his histories that in the year 69 AD, the Batavians felt heavily mistreated in recent times by the hands of Roman army commanders. And when the Roman world erupted into civil war in that year, they had an opportunity to rise in revolt and decided to do so. And during this revolt, they attacked several largely abandoned frontier camps and managed to pillage some of these as well. When, however, in the next year, the Roman world had ceased its civil wars because there had emerged a new emperor, victorious, he sent an army up north that was too formidable for the Batavians to deal with. They had to yield, and a peace treaty was signed, and they once again assumed an allied status to the Romans, and their troops continued to serve as allied troops for the Roman army for the next few centuries.
The Dutch people of the 17th century inhabited a group of provinces that had risen in a long and bloody rebellion against Spanish King Philip II. One of the main reasons for this revolt was that the centralization policies broke the long line of relative autonomy that the provinces had had in the medieval era. To this backdrop, the Batavians became the spiritual ancestors of these people, who also had revolted against their imperial overlords. Many people began to study and often fantasize about these Batavians. It was not only the Dutch that seemed to act like the Batavians would also act more and more like the Dutch. They would dress as Romans, but they distinguished themselves by their long hair and their beards. They were brave and freedom-loving, and their stoicism fit well with the Protestants in the northwestern provinces. The Batavian role model would set an example to all walks of life. Politics as well could follow the Batavian example, even if that meant some creative language was necessary to make the Batavian model fit. However, the always present squabbling of the provinces did not disappear. Quickly, the ownership of the Batavian heritage became a conflict between brothers, ahistorically won by the influential and booming region of Holland. Even though the road was bumpy, the provinces prospered greatly, and they would set to prove they were important in the European theatre, following their beloved Batavians. However, though the Dutch were so prideful in their humble beginnings and their sober look at life, it was best not to remind them too directly of their barbarian origins. Instead, they chose to focus on what they believed was the presence of their 17th century values within these Batavians.
The platform where the Dutch did this most vividly was painting. Two series focusing on the Batavians really stand out. The first series, by Otto van Veen, was painted during the Dutch 12 years truce with Spain. Two things immediately stand out when looking at these paintings. First of all, anachronisms of the contemporary war with Spain are present everywhere. When looking at the painting of the peace negotiations between the Batavians and the Romans, the scenery looks more like a 17th century scene of the 80 Years' War than an actual depiction of an ancient tribe and the Romans. It is clear that Van Veen tried to connect the Dutch and Batavian revolts to each other. The Batavians were portrayed as embodying the same patriarchal ideals as regions of Holland, such as courage and love of freedom, a concept that was further exploited by the commissioners of the second series of paintings, who were in fact heavily influenced by Van Veen. The second series of paintings was commissioned for the new town hall in Amsterdam in 1661 and 62. Amsterdam's new seat of government had to express the grandeur of the city that was seen as the 17th century Rome. Therefore, it comes to no surprise that a prominent place was given to the ancient ancestors of the Dutch. The connections with the Batavians are even more striking than with Van Veen's paintings. For example, Jan Lieven's scene of the tribal commander Brunio being raised on his shield is not even trying to depict the scene of antiquity anymore. The central figure is clearly more a Holland stadtholder than any 1st century CE tribal leader. However, the reflection of 17th century Dutch values in art depicting the Batavians is actually most evident in the exclusion of one of the paintings. Arguably the most famous of the 4 paintings, Rembrandt's Conspiracy of Claudius Civilis, was replaced by another depiction of the same scene less than a year after its completion. This was most likely because Rembrandt's painting did not fit in with his commissioner's objective of glorifying the Dutch ancestors. Since the freedom-loving Batavians were the perfect examples of the virtues that the Dutch had to foster, artists were expected to glorify this in their art. Rembrandt, however, did no such thing. His non-flattering painting actually depicted Julius Civilis, the Batavian leader who he actually erroneously called Claudius, with only one eye, while it was conventional to depict any ancient hero without any flaws. Rembrandt had portrayed Civilis not as the refined, almost aristocratic regent-like leader, such as Brunio in Lievens's painting, but more as the barbarian tribal leader he actually was. This realistic approach, however, lacked the more realistic and heroic depiction that was expected.
The adhering to Otto van Veen's paintings and the exclusion of Rembrandt's Conspiracy of Claudius Civilis clearly reinforced the argument, namely that digital representations of the Batavian Revolt actually reflected 17th century Dutch values more than the Batavians themselves. These 17th century values, most notably love of freedom, were important to incorporate in the depictions of the Batavians, as we've seen in numerous examples. Not following this convention would result in exclusion, as even the greatest Dutch painter himself experienced. Thank you very much for watching.